Initiating development with the knight opens flexible pathways for a prompt pawn advance. Mirroring the knight's development immediately prepares for a symmetrical pawn structure or dynamic imbalance later. 2d4 immediately contests central space, preparing to develop the bishop to a more active diagonal. Embracing the fianchetto, black prepares to control the long diagonal, a classic response to white's early central ambition. Solidifying the center and preparing a potential e4 push, this move aims to control key squares and expand white's influence. The bishop now eyes the king side, potentially supporting future castling and controlling a long diagonal. Challenging black's fianchetto, this bishop prepares for early central pressure and potentially pins the knight. Challenging white's central pawn structure directly, black seeks to undermine the d4 square and potentially open lines for active piece play. Solidifying the center's structure, this prepares development and contests central space. Safeguarding the monarch establishes a secure haven amidst the unfolding central conflict. Developing the knight to d2 offers flexibility, potentially supporting a later e4 push or reinforcing the kingside. Preparing queenside expansion, by preparing the fianchettoed bishop to exert influence on the long diagonal. Challenging the queenside pawn chain creates immediate space and threatens a blockade. Initiating pawn capture immediately opens lines, demanding careful calculation of ensuing exchanges and potential pawn structure weaknesses. Opening the c-file now presents immediate attacking chances along that critical pathway. Developing the bishop to this diagonal directly challenges white's central pawn structure and prepares to contest the long diagonal. Developing the bishop here bolsters the kingside defense and prepares for potential queenside expansion, maintaining flexible pawn structures. Developing the knight to its natural square asserts control over central squares and prepares to contest the d4 pawn's influence. Unleashing the queen to I, that weak b-pawn, creates immediate tactical complications. Challenging the bishop's influence on the queen side, this pawn advances, opening potential diagonal lines. Challenging black's bishop forces a decision on the queenside's development and opens lines for potential tactical skirmishes. Solidifying the pawn chain and preparing for central expansion becomes paramount. Recasting the center's influence, castling brings the king to safety and connects the rooks for future action along open files. Shifting the knight to e7 prepares a queenside pawn push or a potential kingside regrouping, subtly increasing piece mobility. Relocating the bishop consolidates control over the key light squares and prepares for a potential queenside expansion. Challenging the bishop's scope, this knight boldly seeks central influence, eyeing squares like d4 and e3, creating immediate positional friction. Shifting the bishop to guard the kingside while preparing for potential central advances. Aggressively pushing forward, this pawn thrust challenges the bishop's dominance and opens lines, though it potentially weakens the king's shield. Retreating the bishop here frees up the f4 square for future knight activity and aims to diffuse black's kingside aggression by creating potential exchanges. Sacrificing the knight here opens crucial lines and disrupts white's pawn structure, creating dynamic possibilities. Opening the h-file offers an immediate attacking opportunity against the kingside pawn structure. Recentering the queen after the pawn exchange solidifies her presence and prepares to contest the central files. Ramping up pressure on the c-file while white's own king remains remarkably safe initiates a fascinating strategic duel. A daring knight jump, aiming to disrupt white's central control and potentially exploit the e2 bishop's pin. Pioneering the queenside expansion to challenge black's central pawn structure while preparing to seize the open c-file. Securing the c-file for future assaults, this advance brings more weight to the open central artery. Unleashing a central pawn-pawn surge, this bold advance seeks to seize initiative and disrupt black's compact setup. A strategic retreat aims to consolidate the knight's position after the pawn advances, preparing for potential counterplay. Pushing the e-pawn further injects immediate tension, aiming to dislodge the knight and potentially open lines towards black's monarch. The knight retreats, ceding the central outpost to white but preparing to redeploy and support the queenside. This queen repositioning initiates a fascinating battle for the center, potentially opening lines for a direct kingside assault. Unlocking the d-file, black challenges white's central pawn and seeks counterplay with this dynamic pawn break. The bishop galvanizes the queenside, eyeing further advances into enemy territory. Securing the 7th rank offers a solid defensive posture and prepares for potential counterplay. Reclaiming the central outpost for the bishop, after black's aggressive pawn push sharpens the positional battle. Relocating the rook to the open c-file solidifies black's pressure and prepares for potential counterplay along the queenside. Opening the c-file finally forces black to confront the lingering tension, potentially simplifying into a more manageable position or risking further piece activity. Reclaiming the central queen, black initiates a subtle repositioning, eyeing the now open c-file for potential pressure. Disrupting black's pawn chain offers white a tempo, while conceding the bishop pair for central influence. Reclaiming the queen solidifies black's control of the central files and prepares a potential kingside advance. Pushing forward creates a pawn chain, potentially trapping the knight on f6. Hoping to gain a queenside initiative, black repositions the queen to support a potential pawn push, though it also exposes her to enemy action. Consolidating pieces for a central pawn push, aiming to seize initiative. Shifting the queen to threaten the c-pawn creates immediate pressure on white's queenside structure. Fortifying the kingside pawn structure initiates a potential attack, aiming to disrupt black's well-placed knight. Challenging white's queenside ambitions, this pawn push aims to create counterplay and disrupt white's positional dominance. Unleashing a knight onto the central outpost promises significant attacking potential. Controlling the b5 square becomes paramount now. Consider how to prevent white's knight from infiltrating. Opening the b-file for rook infiltration to pressure the queen's defense looks promising here. Contesting the central squares, this black queen bravely ventures forward, seeking to disrupt white's pawn structure and assert influence. The queen repositions, eyeing potential kingside advances while reinforcing the center. Unleashing a rook's potential, this maneuver seeks to disrupt white's pawn structure and gain active play along the c-file. Shifting the knight here aims to contest the d-file and potentially support a central pawn push later on. Shifting the queen to c6 eyes the weakened kingside pawn structure and prepares for potential breakthroughs on the c-file, aiming to disrupt white's coordination. Shifting queens to exploit the weak queenside pawn structure offers a fresh offensive angle. Opening the center with this capture creates dynamic potential, aiming to exploit white's slightly passive king position. Unleashing the c-file, white opens lines for potential piece activity and challenges black's central pawn structure. A bold capture, sacrificing central influence for immediate tactical disruption. The knight's repositioning offers a crucial defensive pivot, protecting against further pawn incursions while eyeing central squares. Sensing a tactical opportunity, black redirects the queen to exploit white's exposed king and potential pawn weaknesses. Shifting the queen offers a fresh perspective on controlling the central open files and prepares for potential pawn advances. A daring dive into white's weakened kingside, aiming to expose their monarch through active piece play. Securing the pawn chain on the kingside now solidifies white's central structure against black's queenside ambitions. Unleashing the f-pawn creates immediate pawn structure chaos, inviting complications and potential weaknesses around the king. Exposing black's king, this captures a pawn and opens lines for attack, potentially leading to a decisive material advantage. Recapturing the pawn injects central activity, threatening doubled knights and disrupting white's pawn structure with tactical energy. Deploying the knight to a central outpost creates tactical possibilities while solidifying the queenside defense. Trading queens now simplifies the position, but the unprotected king on the g-file leaves weaknesses. The rook now firmly anchors itself on the second rank, eyeing the weak pawns and preparing to exploit any subsequent breakthroughs. Trading off the remaining knights simplifies the position, leading towards an endgame where active rook play will be paramount. Solidifying the knight's central outpost, this repositioning aims to control key squares and prepare for future pawn advances, potentially creating weaknesses in black's structure. Recapturing the pawn with the bishop sacrifices tempo, but aims to disrupt white's rook activity. The king steps out of the corner, seeking safer skies and offering a potential flight path. Safeguarding the monarch by tucking it away is a sound choice in this messy middle game. Activating the king offers a fighting chance in this endgame, seeking squares beyond the back rank. Trading rooks here opens up the king side and potentially streamlines the pawn endgame. Recapturing the rook simplifies the position, paving the way for a potentially winning endgame given your material advantage. Unleashing the king creates immediate counterplay, threatening to dominate the board and chase away white's pieces. Sacrificing the bishop to establish a passed pawn on the king side, though it concedes material for initiative. Pushing the h-pawn creates a diversion, attempting to draw white's rook from its defensive post. Kings march forward, venturing into enemy territory to solidify its presence and prepare for the upcoming pawn skirmish. Pushing the pawn forward further strains white's king's already precarious safety. Chasing the enemy king's defender allows us to occupy the central open files. Sacrificing the bishop's outpost offers a glimmer of hope for counterplay, but it's a desperate gambit in a lost position. A decisive check, forcing the black king out into the open where it becomes a vulnerable target for the remaining pieces. Shifting the monarch away from the unleashed rook seems a sensible precaution against further penetration. Asserting dominance over the critical c-file, this rook aims to dislodge black's bishop and disrupt its defensive posture. Black aims to disrupt white's centralized pieces and create active play on the queen side, hoping for tactical opportunities against the exposed king. The rook on b3 now eyes the isolated c-pawn, a potential target as white simplifies. Offering to trade the bishop again, a potentially drawish path with limited winning chances. A curious attempt to activate the rook, but it seems to be merely repositioning for potential future action rather than immediate threat. Seizing the open a file offers a potential backdoor entry, but be wary of overextending and leaving your king exposed. King marches forward, seeking activity and a chance to participate in the endgame. Sacrificing pawn control now opens a dangerous path for white's king to penetrate. A desperate attempt to create counterplay, sacrificing pawn structure for fleeting activity. The black king ventures out, a bold maneuver seeking active participation in the endgame's evolving landscape. Bolstering the king's safety, securing a crucial outpost for future maneuvers. The black king boldly steps into the center, challenging white's pawns and seeking active post-game play. Reinforcing the king's escape route opens up defensive possibilities against black's advancing pawn storm. Advancing the king here risks immediate exposure to the rook and pawn attack, potentially accelerating white's mating net. The white rook now occupies a critical outpost, menacing black's isolated kingside pawn structure. Capitalizing on the exposed king, black secures a crucial passed pawn, drastically altering the endgame's complexion. Unleashing a rook check, this sequence aims to dislodge the enemy monarch from its secure corner, potentially opening avenues for decisive material gain. Relocating the king to the edge now risks becoming a target for the rook's pursuit. The rook's new perch on the first rank now prepares to exploit any weakness in black's kingside pawn structure. Pawn advances along the queen side offer a glimmer of activity, aiming to disrupt white's rook. Pioneering a new flank opens critical avenues for the queen and king. A pawn push here seems designed to impede white's rook, but it surrenders crucial central square control. Pivoting the rook to the kingside aims to create pressure against the weakened pawn structure, potentially forcing concessions. The black king, emboldened by recent trades, ventures out towards the queenside, seeking active participation. Securing the king by marching it towards the center aims to activate its defensive and offensive potential in the ensuing endgame struggle. The king bravely marches forward, seeking active participation in this endgame battle. King consolidation begins, maneuvering towards central control and offering a sanctuary from potential pawns. A desperate attempt to create space, but it weakens the king's defenses further. Asserting kingside space advantage with the pawn push is a bold, albeit risky, final gambit. Unlocking the king's path forward with this pawn thrust creates immediate complications in the center. Securing the rook's retreat path to the central open file prevents black's active pieces from dominating. Sacrificing the bishop opens a critical diagonal, potentially creating a passed pawn, but also exposing the king to counterplay. The rook now activates aggressively, aiming to support the pawn's promotion and threaten black's king. The pawn's advance initiates a decisive race to create a passed pawn, a critical endgame objective. Securing the 7th rank now becomes paramount, preventing black's bishop from becoming a powerful attacking force. Unlocking the g-file presents a decisive attacking opportunity for black's king. The rook exchange simplifies the position, leading to a potentially drawn endgame due to opposite-colored bishops. King's safety has completely evaporated, leaving the monarch exposed to a swift mating attack. King finally finds some breathing room, escaping the suffocating pawn chain.